and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and this is a special episode. I'm going to be starting a story-based series called So There I Was, Hunting Stories of Epic Adventure. This is where I will tell a story of a specific buck and also break down the how and why it worked out. I'll be inserting these here and there throughout this year. I'll also apply some of the principles we've been going over in the 6 steps or core competencies of highly effective hunters and how those worked out in this real-world hunting situation. This hunt is about my 2016 Ohio 13 point, and this story is kind of wild and shows the interconnectedness of whitetail hunters in both success and failures. And yes, we have a free journal you can download below that will really help you get the most out of this podcast. Okay, so here are the top things to look for during this episode. What was so disappointing about my previous season, 2015, and what can we learn from that failure? How did the first sit rule, or the strategic strike I talk about so much, come into play with several bucks in this story? How much time passed between getting high value intel about this particular buck and me getting the shot? What were key moments and decisions I made when it came to tracking and retrieving this buck that were pivotal to finding him? What happened with 2 other hunters who pursued this deer for 3 years, found out about his demise, and the big twist here, what well-known person did this wind up being? And there's a lot more good stuff in there in this special episode of So There I Was, which I'll be reading from a journal-style article I wrote documenting this unique story, and I'll also add further narrative to help. All right, so let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. The title of this story is Love Thy Neighbor, and I'm going to be reading it, but also going to be adding some narration as well to tell a little bit more of the story, because when you're writing an article for a magazine, you can only have 1,500 to 1,800 words, and so I'm going to add a little bit more to that to tell a little bit more of the story. Competition is a reality of hunting whitetail, with many hunters seeing bucks thereafter disappear without a trace or appear on their neighbor's wall. Tensions often run high in this high-stakes environment. The following is a rare look at the hunts of 2 strangers over a span of 3 years, their unknowing dual pursuit of one exceptional buck, and the unlikely intersection of their stories at the climactic end. This journal-style entry allows a walk in the shoes of both hunters, revealing the stark reality of the ups, the downs, and the interconnectedness we all share as hunters in both failure and success. Adam, November 2015. It's hard to feel good for the guy who just shot the ghost buck out from under me. I'd patterned him all fall and knew where he was traveling. My trail camera even captured a daylight picture of him at my stand yesterday. Harder yet, finding out another Ohio bruiser I encountered during my morning hunt was mortally wounded by his buddy, and they didn't find him. That's hunting, right? I should just be happy that Lon, the landowner of the 100-acre property, gave permission to this out-of-stater, much less a Michigan fan. However, ending a season like that is never easy. So the big backstory there in 2015, where I hunt in Ohio, the landowner let a couple other guys hunt there, and I'd been there the weekend prior, hunting, didn't have any luck, but I saw this really nice buck on my camera at this one location where I have a stand, and it was at night and really foggy, so that's hence the ghost buck, but I could tell it was a really nice buck. And so I planned to come down the very next weekend, and that's what I did. I went down there, and those other guys had showed up a few days prior, and so I go out that morning and hunt and pull that trail camera, and there's a daylight picture of him walking right in front of my stand there, and that was a great sign. But then I went down at midday after pulling some trail cameras, and I see these other guys' truck, and there's antlers sticking up out of the truck. And when I go up and look at it, I was like, wow, that's a real nice buck. And then, I had this sinking moment where I realized it was that buck. And I talked to the guy, and he actually shot it the same night that it showed up on my camera. So I was just a day late, basically, with that one. So that was kind of tough to swallow. I went out and hunted that night at a different spot on that property, kind of a saddle where they cross during the rut quite a bit. And I went out that next morning, and the other guy that was with him wound up coming in right at daylight about 150 yards from me. And I could hear him come in. I could hear him throughout the early morning rattling back there. And this really nice buck. And I have some videos of some of this stuff that I'm going to talk about in pictures. So if you're not listening on the video form, you might want to head over there to see those. But this real nice buck came up following this doe. And for some reason, they should have come right in front of me. They wound up skirting just behind me. And it wound up going right to this guy. I heard the shot. I heard him shoot this deer. I heard the arrow thump as it hit him. And then I find out later that they never recovered that buck. So there's 2 bucks gone in that area. And that was kind of my season. It went from a lot of potential to nothing. And I never filled my tag that year. So it was a really rough year for me in Ohio. So that's the backstory there in 2015. Tom is the other person in this character in this story. Tom, November 2015. 20 miles southwest. Jason and I climbed the big pine in the back food plot at Dad's property around 2:30 p.m. The adjoining acreage is ideal whitetail habitat, including a thick chunk of real estate owned by Betty, a real nice lady open to letting hunters keep deer out of her garden. Filming Jason pass on a good 10-point last year near here was an incredible footage for the life in our first year on the Sportsman's Channel, but left Jason wanting more. This buck we named Tiny Twos due to his G2s being slightly shorter than his G3s. He's shown up on multiple trail camera pictures this year, revealing he's a real good one. I decided before the season to give Jason a chance at this buck, who is now on the top of our hit list. Jason isn't giving him a pass this year. Today is the last hunt of Jason's 2015 season, and we hoped does would show early and entice a lovesick buck like Tiny Twos into the clearing. As the golden hour began, a few does filtered into the plot, and our anticipation steadily grew. As if scripted, rustling of leaves in the woods revealed some heavy chasing, and moments later a buck popped into the plot, the sun glinting off his many tines. It was Tiny Twos, and he was almost in range. Pulses skyrocketed as Jason slowly grabbed his bow and I swung the camera. Just a few more steps. Suddenly, a noise from our left put the does on alert, and Tiny Twos as well. In an instant, what was almost in the bag turned into a heartbreaking exit of bounding bodies and white flags. So close. If we can catch up to him now, it will have to be next year. Adam, summer of 2016. There's a new neighbor at Lon's where the ghost buck was taken, and he looked serious about his hunting. Again, competition, and again, limited resource. This just got a bit tougher. I'll be back for the opener in late September, but there's an underwhelming number of remote trail cam pictures streaming in with no shooters. Maybe Betty's holds better promise this year, and a new monster or two will show themselves at my cameras there. I'll have to wait until September to pull the cards and see. Adam, September 2016. Nothing at Betty's other than a few small bucks licking the camera lens. Luckily, a few white oaks are dropping acorns on the ridge at Lon's, where I placed a stand in July. Does, fawns, and a handful of bucks showed during my short weekend hunt. Just not what I was looking for. I really wonder if the neighboring competition has removed all the good bucks that were around last year. What did the neighbors take, and are there any shooters left? This competition thing is getting old fast. Tom, October 2016. Jason heads up from the Lone Star State later in the month for an Illinois hunt and then plans on getting after Tiny Twos in Ohio the first week of November. Seeing no sign of him since the 2015 season has made us both nervous. Then, right on cue for Jason's visit, a nighttime picture in that same fateful food plot from 2015 shows up. He's still alive, and man has he blown up. This could be our chance. Tom, November 2016. With Illinois out of the way, we climbed into the Ohio stands with high anticipation. This has turned into something personal for Jason, and the big mature 6 on our hit list passing within bow range with no shot attempt proves it. With such a history with this buck, it's tiny twos or bust for Jason. Hunting hard doesn't always equal success though, and as our rut hunt days dwindled and ended on November 5th, a bust is just what it was. Adam, November 2016. The remote trail camera gave me a good idea of what was happening on Lon's 100 acres. A few good bucks had started showing sporadically, but due to the passing of my grandmother, I couldn't head down for a late October hunt like I had planned. It was all or nothing for a long weekend in early November, and to add more challenge, the hunters who shot the ghost buck last year would be there too. I would have to be strategic and aggressive. To maximize my time in the woods, I hurried to Betty's the night I arrived at 10 p.m. to set a camera over some corn. Maybe something good had moved into the neighborhood. I needed an alternative to Lon's if it didn't pan out. The second morning at Lon's, I took that strategic chance. I walked through an open field well before light, knowing I might spook deer, and headed straight toward the best doe bedding area on the property. As the first rays of light cut through the timber, a high, wide 8-point appeared behind me with his nose to the ground. One grunt, and he was marching to me on a string. I moved my camera, drew once, then again, but failed to hit my rangefinder. This left him with a mere haircut and me with a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
Dang, he was a good buck, too. Realizing my aggressive tactics had made some impact on deer movement, I decided to give Betty's property a try that evening. It was November 7th. So, not to get confused with the properties here, there's two properties I hunt in Ohio. One is Lon's, which that's not his real name, and one is Betty's, not her real name either. But they're about 20 miles apart, about a 25-minute drive. And so I keep track of both of those through the year. I split my time, and I really try to go off the intel of what's where and what I can actually shoot. So that's kind of what I was doing this year. And I got pretty aggressive going in and knowing that there's a really thick hilltop off these fields where bucks and does bed, and that's where I headed that morning. So it was a pretty aggressive hunt, but it paid off. And the tough part about hunting with while you're filming, self-filming, is just that. It's such a distraction. It's so tough. And what happened there was literally the deer came right to me from about 50 yards, and I had to let down and draw again. And then he turned and moved some more after I drew the second time, and I just didn't range him. I thought he was closer than he was, and I missed him. So that was another disappointment, even after the disappointments in 2015. So I decided to head over to the other property. The southeast wind told me to hunt the far northwest corner of the property. I must have deliberated for half an hour with my climber on my back, but instead cut the parcel in half and walked down the long hill that ran to the bottom of the property. Heavy rubs, active scrapes, and big fresh tracks caught my eye on my walk. Checking the trail camera gave me even better sign. A great buck, in daylight, the morning prior, lingered where I stood. Only half his rack was visible, but it was enough to know I had to hunt right there, right then. This might be the 10-point Betty told me the neighbors had been hunting the last 2 years. Several hours later, some raucous blue jays snapped me to attention. A buck was pushing a doe behind and parallel to me in thick brush, and as he turned sideways, lip curling to catch her scent, I saw the massive beams. This was the buck from the trail camera. Grabbing my grunt call, I let out a deep grunt followed by a snort wheeze. Turning as if to follow the doe, he suddenly broke away and worked down the hill toward my shooting lane. It was then I realized the 6 years of work, sweat, and disappointment were about to reach a climax. As he emerged broadside, one step, then another, and his vitals came into clear view, I drew. With the pin settling behind his shoulder, I squeezed the release. Okay, so here's your high IQ moment. What is your plan to get scouting data to maximize what I call your first sit opportunities? From my experience and collared buck studies done at the University of Auburn, a hunter's best chance is to get it done his first time in. But if you misjudge when to go in, or the timing of your hunt, then this first sit may be a bust and really hurt you, putting undue pressure on the area that could have been best maybe later on. This is why it's important to really have current scouting and also to rank your data as actionable or non-actionable intel. That way your timing is better when you do go in for a strategic strike, and your chances of success become much higher. Because as we all know in life, timing is everything. Something to think about as we get into deer season that will help to maximize our time in the woods. And do you know your deer IQ? Do you think you're deer smart? Our new and enhanced deer IQ test may be for you. It's a totally different test than the one we had last year and does what nothing else out there does. Actually tell you the exact strengths and weaknesses and the areas you need to focus on to consistently take great whitetail. We all have blind spots, and this helps us to see where we can most improve and to help make big steps in those most vital areas. It includes a free consultation as well to help you set highly effective hunting goals that actually get results. Sign up for that below. All right, and now let's get back to the podcast. With the pin settling behind his shoulder, I squeezed the release. And what happened here was a complete pass-through, but it was toward the back of his ribs. And I could watch him walk away. He walked about 80 yards up and over a hill. And I watched him the whole time, and he acted like he wasn't even hit. And that was a big disappointment. And seeing that, seeing him not even, act like anything happened, I just backed out of there that night and decided to give it the whole night and go back in the morning. So that was a tough night, but that was my call based on what I saw in the shot. Tom, November 8th, 2016. The warm daytime temperatures and some urgent show deadlines have kept me out of the woods the last few days. Bucks are beginning to chase a bit though, as I saw several doing just that on my early morning drive to vote. Maybe Tiny Twos is on the move. Today, though, was punching a ballot. Hopefully tomorrow we'll be punching a buck tag. And that was the 2016 presidential election. Adam, November 8th, 2016. As the sun came up, the tracking began. It was a long night waiting, but the shot placement was a bit back, and the brute hadn't even acted hit as he walked off. Blood turned to a random speck quickly, and after a nerve-wracking hour on my hands and knees, I finally found where he had bedded on the side of an open ridge. There was blood, but not much. This was now down to a body search in thick cover, and I felt sick as the possibility of losing this buck became very real. Needing a mental break, I took a 40-yard walk parallel to the brush I felt he had probably headed into. Seeing what looked like a small scrape in a clearing below, I decided to take a look. Blood. A shot of hope coursed through me, and as I had done several times during the day, I scanned the area hoping to end my tracking with the sight of a brown body. That's when I noticed something just below. In that moment, my heart raced. I was short of breath, and I could not believe my eyes. What was one of the lowest points in my hunting career just seconds prior, accepting I would probably lose the biggest buck of my life, changed in one exhilarating moment as I stared through the brush at the massive rack of a downed Ohio whitetail. A surreal feeling swept over me as I put my hands on the solid 13 point with shorter G2s than G3s. I thank God for all that had transpired as I dragged him uphill to my truck and somehow heaved his massive body onto the tailgate.
A 13 point. No way. Unbelievable.
At the house, Betty was all smiles, and as I lowered the tailgate to give her a look, she snapped a picture with her phone. Tom, November 9, 2016. I had just returned to Dad's from hunting his property with my cameraman. With Jason gone, it was my turn to put in some time for Tiny Twos. As we dug into dinner, Dad mentioned a buck being shot by someone at Betty's, a 13 point. My heart sank. Oh no, I thought. That story's gone. I was disappointed for Jason, but somehow felt happy for the guy that had harvested such a great buck. Competition, that's the way it goes. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking that maybe it wasn't Tiny Twos, but when I saw the telltale G2s on Betty's picture, it was clear. I called Jason to tell him the news. Jason, speechless for a few moments, finally broke the silence. Well, good for him. Adam, December 2016. A letter came in the mail from Betty confirming the buck I shot was the one the neighbors were after. The neighbor, Tom, had named the buck Tiny Twos. She said he wanted to talk to me sometime, and I remembered all the work I'd put in the year before, having the ghost buck shot out from under me, and how I felt talking to the guy who shot him. Now the shoe was on the other foot. Interesting how that works. Several days later, I called, and Tom was quick to pick up with an energetic and cheerful tone. "Hey man, you shot my buck." Laughing, I could tell he got what I had been figuring out. They will all have our turn, our right place at the right time moment, and it's even possible for highly competitive hunters to be genuinely happy for someone else's success, even when it means our failure. Tom continued, "Let me tell you about Tiny Twos." Okay, so quite a story. Hopefully you could catch the back and forth and what was going on with simultaneous, stories going with me and unbeknownst to me, Tom and us both, him really going after that buck for 3 years and me basically that one day. It took one day for me to know he was alive and then shoot him. And it's just interesting how those two parallel stories connect at the end. And Tom, the guy I was talking about, is Tom Petrie. And he has a show called Become One on the Sportsman's Channel. And when the landowner was telling me about this guy that had a show, originally I thought, well, he's got probably a YouTube channel with like 50 followers or something, And little did I know who it actually was. And so he has that show on the Sportsman's Channel. Since then, he's sold that land, or his father did, so he doesn't have access to that anymore. But it was just a spot he kind of hunted now and again. And so not only that, but he also does the Film the Hunt camp, where a lot of people in the industry actually go to that camp. It used to be called, I think, the Campbell Camera School. And he's the teacher of that. And so a lot of people know him through that as well. Anyways, he's a pretty well-known guy. And it was just interesting to see that, and I'll show through this video some of the pictures because he sent me a ton of pictures of this buck as a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and then as a 4-year-old when I shot him, and also some film. So I want to take a second to just kind of break down this hunt and look at some lessons to learn from this, or that I did. You can probably pick out some more that I don't even mention here. So if you do that, put them in the comments below. What did you get out of this? What did you take from this story? Or what would you if it was you? Put those in the comments below. But these are some things that I thought about as I did this, and some takeaways for me. The biggest one was just Tom and Jason's response wasn't your typical hunter response. There's a lot of jealousy out there and things, and that was pretty cool to see, just the interconnectedness of the whole thing. It kind of brought that up to me, right? That the success and failure is really tied to other people. Like sometimes you get the buck, sometimes the neighbor gets the buck. And the reality is it's okay to be competitive about that. And, you should be trying. And I would teach this. You're doing your best to make sure the neighbor doesn't shoot the buck and that you do. Right? You're doing your best. But at the end of the day, you know that sometimes that's not going to happen. And the neighbor will shoot the buck. And it just kind of brought up that, you know what? It's okay. And you have to be to the point where you're okay with that, right? It's just the reality. And so although you're trying really hard and it might be competitive, you still, at the end of the day, you're holding it loosely enough that you can be okay with that. And you can wish the guy the best and be happy for him at the end of the day. Because some days, some years, that's going to be you. And some years it won't. So keeping that perspective, I think, is super important. And one thing that really stood out to me with that, from the 2015 season where it happened to me, where I felt a buck was shot out from under me. And then in 2016, the tables were completely the opposite, where I was the beneficiary of a lot of things, and I had zero history with that deer. And that's kind of how it goes sometimes when you look at the big picture. It is a bit of an odds game with so many hunters out there. The second thing that really pop out is what I call the art of the first sit. That is the same as the strategic strike I talk about, or the surgical strike, which is the top of the pyramid. It's the last thing that you put together to put in a good hunt and hopefully get a deer. And that's exactly what happened in this case for me with those 2 bucks. The 8-point that I missed, that was a strategic chance that I took. And the first sit back in there, I had a shot at a real nice buck. It was the same with the 13-point. I went in there the first time, and the first time I was in there, I got a great shot, and I got this buck. And that's typically how it will work. The thing you have to do, and we'll talk about this more throughout this season, is you have to read the data and you have to get the timing right. Because if you don't get the timing right, it's not going to work out, and you can actually put pressure where you shouldn't. And so you really have to be wise about that. But that just highlights that is a key. It's a really key thing. How do you get first sit opportunities every time out and really do these strategic strikes? And that's what I was able to do. The 13-point was a little bit of luck in the way that I didn't know going in there, but I saw all the data on the way. And that was really key to tell me exactly when and where I should hunt, and it should be right there. There was also some fresh scrapes where I put up my stand, and he was actually coming down to those when I got that shot. He was putting his nose in a scrape broadside at about 30 yards. And so all those things came together that told me that is a place to be. And the last thing, the cherry on the top, was that daylight picture of him there within 24 hours of when I hunted. So that's a big deal, how you do that and how you put that together. A third thing that pops out to me is what I call strategic chances. I took some bigger chances, and I'll do that more on public land. On private, I tried to be more conservative, but I took some big ones here. And the reality is, when I do this, I'm looking for actionable intel, and you have to sift out the non-actionable intel. And so the intel I had on the 8-point was less, and I put it in a scale of a 1 to 5 scale, and I put this at about a 3. Historically, I knew that does bedded on this ridge, and bucks did too at the point of this ridge, but that they would come in there during the rut and seek does. They're always popping in and out of there. And so I was in a stand in a strategic spot based on that. I didn't have any current data that would tell me that that should be the place to be, but it was historic. And so that's about a 3. That's a decent hunt, especially in the rut, because anything can happen. So I was in a good area, but I didn't have exact intel to tell me it was super hot. And so that was a good bet. I wouldn't want to go on any less than that, but it worked out in this case. And typically, those 3s, as I call them, on actionable intel, those are more rut-type hunts when you're going off that sort of intel. The 13-point I got, I'd call that a 5 on the intel. That's about as good as you can get. You have all this fresh sign that I saw walking down, fresh tracks, fresh scrapes, fresh rubs. And I get down there and I see him in daylight, that he's active in that area. That's about as good as it gets. And within about 24-hour period, he's been there. And so when you do that, if you find data like that, that's when you know that is very actionable intel, and you should hunt right then and right there. And most of the time when you do that, you're going to get at least a sighting of that deer, good chance you get a crack at him. And that's the kind of data you're looking for. So that all came together really good on that hunt. And I would venture to guess that, there's always a little luck involved, but that hunt, how it came together for me versus the hunts Tom and Jason had with him, I had the better intel to tell me that was right where to hunt him. And they were going off not as good intel, and they didn't have quite as good results. That's just kind of comparing what that looks like in results that comes from not being sure about data and being real sure with the data. The fourth thing that kind of pops out to me is, the timing thing I've been talking about, timing these things right. And it's, the rut is a little bit of a gamble. You can't predict movement totally, but timing these hunts right So they're high odds as possible. And that's when I time my hunts, is around certain times a year. That's one way you can do it. But also having a cool off period I talk about. And I recently did some seminars with this where I talk about this cool off period. How many times can I hunt a spot and it still be that first sit quality? And it really is 1 or 2 times. That's it. And then you got to let it cool off for a certain period. The rut, okay, anything could come running through there. There was 2 miles away yesterday. I get that. But you start pressuring does in the area, that's going to alter all the other deer's movement. And so giving a cool out period is really important. And that really is weeks. That is weeks of time. And so after I got that shot of that 8-point, the next day, a different deer could have walked through there still doing that. This still could have been a viable spot because it's the rut, and pretty much only because it's the rut. But giving that a cool off and going to another property, having a diversified portfolio enough that I could have another property to go to, really helped me out to not overhunt one spot, especially with 2 other guys there. That was my concern. And it worked out because I had that and was not wearing out spots. That really helps you out if you have enough spots to do that. And then you can read the data much better and have much higher odds hunts because the data is telling you to hunt here or there. So that was a big one too in this case. And the 5th thing that really stood out, and I didn't get into this that much in the story, but was playing it safe on iffy shots. That was an iffy shot, especially with the reaction. It was a liver shot. And just not going with emotions, just playing it safe and backing out, erring on the side of caution is always good. And it really paid off in this case. Now, the blood trail was super tough. Like, I was down on my hands and knees for a lot of this track and just specks of blood. It was tough. And I had to go up over a ridge, and I kind of lost him there. I found the one spot he was bedded, and then it dried up. And that's when I was at a low. That was when I was like, if he gets in this thick brush and onto the neighboring property, I might not find him, right? And I happened onto the next bed, and he was not too far. But if I had pushed him, he probably would have gone a lot further, and with that blood, might not have found him, right? And so it's really important not to push, and also get really good at tracking. Being really patient as you track, being good at tracking, making sure you don't mess up the area as you track, and taking a slow pace to it really helps out when it's down to drops like that, to not push it and not rush it. And nowadays, I understand that tracking dogs are definitely helpful, but I would encourage people to really up your skills as a tracker and not rely on dogs. Becoming a better tracker will really help you in general. And that's what it took in this case, was knowing kind of where this deer would go. He was headed downhill to this thick area that helped me get on this track again and find him. So I hope you got something good out of that. Let me know in the comments below what you got out of it, or what you might like to talk about more of some of these things that I mentioned. But just a really cool story that you don't often get to see, how these parallel lives interconnect, and you get to trace the story back, which was really neat with some of these pictures and stories that Jason and Tom told me about this buck, and just the stuff they shared with me was pretty cool. So I hope you got something out of that story. Okay, so here are your high IQ takeaways and challenges. Think about a hunting story of yours from the past, success or failure, and try writing it down. Then make a list of 3 takeaways you can learn from that experience. It's a great exercise to grow and become a better hunter, and forces you to figure out all the important whys of your experience. And that does wrap up our summer prep series. And next time we begin a new series all about public land hunting with a well-known guest, Jared Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline. I'm really excited about this episode and the whole series, where we get very real about hunting public land in this day and age, and how to beat the crowds and still find good bucks. You won't want to miss that, and I'll see you then.